Welcome back to Industrial Risk Beyond the Blueprint. I'm your host, Jawanza Joseph. Today we're exploring a very special topic, one of space and space exploration and the risks that are present there. With all the excitement around Artemis missions over the last couple of weeks, I couldn't help but be excited for this topic and introduce two really extraordinary guests who live and breathe this work of high stakes risk. First, we'll have Dr. Jim Peters and then also Dr. Louis Carfagno. They are not only military veterans, but former NASA experts and also space leaders at a space institute. They are esteemed professors at Embry-Riddle Astronautical University, and they're shaping the next generation of aerospace leaders. It is a privilege to have them, and I look forward to your thoughts on this episode. Dr. Jim and Dr. Lou, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, Roger that.
Thank you, Joanza.
All right, to start, you both have just really star-studded backgrounds spanning the military, NASA, and academia as well at Embry-Riddle. Can you share a bit about your perspectives and your paths on how you got here, how you ended up working together, and how your rich career kind of led you to this moment where you're working together?
Yeah, I'll start it off. So I recently retired from NASA after a 29-year career working human spaceflight missions. I also owned and operated a Quasar data center. I was president of the company, and we sold that last year as well. So I updated my social media, and lo and behold, Lou contacted me. And interestingly enough, he's a former Embry-Riddle student of mine. He said, hey, let's get together and do some business. And that's how we formed the Space Leadership Institute and the Space Guys. And so that's how it all started. That's why we're here today. And our goal essentially is to share our NASA experience and the things that NASA does well with business and other organizations so they can learn some of the same lessons and, more importantly, incorporate those into their daily business operations.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. And I guess, Dr. Lou, anything you want to add to that?
Of course. And so let me tell you, when you're talking about a rich experience, working for the government or a university, there's nothing rich about that experience, okay? But for my background, I started loving airplanes growing up. I wound up joining the military, working with the SR-71 and U-2 spy planes as an aerospace physiology specialist. Then from there, I got my experience in the military, got out, wound up going to NASA, working as a spacesuit engineer. Carrying on with that experience, I finished my bachelor's, master's. As Jim said, I was one of his best students or better students. Taught me how to do research, because then I became a really hard professor for research because I have high standards. Finished my doctorate, gave back, taught as a professor for Embry-Riddle and Texas Women's University as well. And then we got together to make this business. I thought Jim was available, and I said, you know what, let's team together and make this Space Leadership Institute work, and along with the Space Guys.
Perfect. So I guess I wanted to dive back in on that. When you say there's nothing rich about that, are you talking about financial compensation or something else?
No, it's pretty much financial compensation. We work for a government program.
Yeah,
you're not getting rich.
No,
you're in Congress.
Okay.
We're basically, we do what we do because we love it, right? And I know many people who go on through life, have personal and professional businesses that make a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
We don't look at it saying, God, I wish we did that and made all that money, because we're helping people. And this is what this is all about. It's the cool factor of the jobs. So when you tell people what you have done to give back to the community, to give back to the space program, it's really wonderful. It's a wonderful experience.
Yeah, and I'll second that as well. Two of the things that I really enjoyed working at NASA were similar to what I enjoyed in the military. I really loved the mission focus. It's the same at NASA as it was in the military, and also the camaraderie. So you develop these relationships, work with outstanding, very smart people, and it's all very mission focused, trying to keep the astronauts alive and trying to execute a successful mission. So there's a lot of purpose and reward in doing that. We don't starve as government workers, but we're not filthy rich like Elon Musk either.
I guess that's a good transition point. So, Dr. Jim, you served in the as a nuclear submarine officer for 33 years before transitioning to NASA. What was it like working as a nuclear submarine officer, and what made you want to transition to NASA?
Yeah, just one quick clarification. I did 5 years on the USS Hyman G. Rickover as a nuclear fast submarine out of Norfolk, Virginia. And I did my 5-year tour of duty and decided to move on. And it was a natural progression to go into the space program because both submarines and spacecraft operate in harsh environments. And they have some of the same hazards. Clearly, you're trying to keep the people alive on both the submarine and the space station or space shuttle, or whatever the case may be. So they have very similar hazards. So on a submarine, you're primarily worried about flooding. On a spacecraft, you're worried about depressurization. Both of them worry about fire, hazardous or toxic environment. So there's a lot of different things that are very similar. And that's how I got my job working on the International Space Station, because all the environmental control and life support systems and thermal control systems that are utilized on a submarine are very similar to what's used on the space station. So that's how I naturally progressed over to work in the space industry.
Okay. I didn't realize that those hazards were so overlapped like that. I had no idea.
Yeah, the major ones are very similar. Like I said, we're trying to keep the people alive, and those are some of the major hazards. There's also loss of attitude control for a spacecraft. It's pretty much the same if you lose your control systems on a submarine. It's not a good day.
Yeah. So I guess I wanted to just quickly tap on the fire hazard. So is this kind of inhalation risk, or is it more of like a fire spreading risk, or both? Well, what makes that kind of especially pernicious in these two environments?
Yeah, for a spacecraft, fire burns a little bit differently. It actually burns in like a ball rather than a flame. And it's very hard to extinguish. If you try and point a fire extinguisher at this ball of fire on a spacecraft, it tends to spread rather rapidly. And so you have this enclosed environment. So not only do you have the fire hazard causing damage to the equipment, but it's also typically putting off toxic gas as well. So in a small contained environment, that becomes a hazard really quick. And we have had experiences of fire, both on the International Space Station, which was contained, and also Space Station Mir, when we did the U.S.-Russian missions back in the late 90s. Both almost evacuate the station situations. But yeah, and then the same is true on a submarine. The option there is that we come to the surface and we can ventilate the submarine. You don't have that option as in the space station.
Okay. Wait, so does the fire behave differently submerged in water in the submarine, or is it more kind of the flames that I'm used to seeing?
It's the flames that you're used to seeing, but it's very scary, that's for sure, if you get a fire on a sub. It's the same as various fire on a shuttle or spacecraft.
Yeah, I think every movie I've seen with submarines, there's always fires on them. So
yeah,
I don't know. So I guess it's probably more rare and scary, but then I guess it's makes for good television or good film going.
Definitely.
Okay, I want to talk about your experience as the owner and president of Quasar Data Center. So how did you get into owning and running a data center? What led you from where you were before to that moment?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. The Space Shuttle retired in 2011, and I was a flight director on the Constellation program, which was canceled in 2010. So other than the International Space Station, we really didn't have a lot going on at NASA in terms of human spaceflight. So I was actually considering leaving the agency at the time until I got involved with the Commercial Crew Program, which is the Boeing company and SpaceX flying our astronauts up to our space station. But that's when we purchased, my wife and I and her brother-in-law purchased Quasar Data Center, and it seemed like a good opportunity if I wasn't going to stay with NASA, which I eventually did. And we ran and operated Quasar, but we take some of the same procedures that we do for risk management and apply them to Quasar. We identify the risk, we prioritize them, we mitigate them, and then we monitor and track the performance. So it's very similar to what we do at NASA. So I take what we learned at NASA, applied it to a business, and it worked rather well.
Okay. And it's a Quasar Data Center serving technology businesses for like different applications, or who are your customers in that business?
Yeah, I always said we're equal opportunity capitalists. So about every business and organization today operates some network to conduct their daily business. So we do co-location. Our biggest product and services was private cloud computing. We also did network support services, cybersecurity, backup, business continuity, storage, et cetera. So anything that touches the customer network, we would be involved with in some form or fashion. So we consider ourselves, like I said, equal opportunity capitalists, and we're a full service data center 24/7.
And as you ran that business, you talked about risk management, risk mitigation, or were the biggest risks cyber-related risks, or were they, okay.
But not just for Quasar, but for our customers. And so we have continuous monitoring. We have contingency plans in place. Of course, we put all these different firewalls and other mitigations in place to mitigate it. But we're just like any company, we're under constant attack. Probably 1,000 attacks a day is what we average. But the biggest threat is like the 0-day cybersecurity attack, one that's never been seen before. because it may be able to penetrate. And so we have enough resiliency built into our system that if we do get a penetration, we could isolate it and still operate with our backup systems. But yeah, cybersecurity is our biggest risk. Loss of power and loss of cooling are the other two. Also big concerns on spacecraft.
I forgot about the cooling, and I guess is there a access to utilities risk of like getting enough water, getting enough power to power your facility, or is that all pre-negotiated? I'm not sure about the economics of how this all works.
We have multiple power feeds, and we also have a backup diesel generator, so we can go for about 2 weeks on the diesel generator if we didn't have any normal power supplies. But we have redundant underground power feeds to our facility. Our water system or our cooling system is a closed loop system. So we don't use evaporation, if you will, for cooling. It's all closed loop. And so it's about a 1,800 gallon system, and we probably use about 5 gallons a year on makeup water.
Okay.
So not a whole lot, but we're very resilient. We have both the primary and backup thermal control system that can handle all the heat loads.
Thank you for educating me. I feel like in these 3 questions, like getting like a full education on like 3 different topics. But that's part of why I was so excited to have both of you on. I know you also led the shuttle return to flight debris risk integration and wrote a book called Return to Flight. Can you talk a little bit about that experience and kind of maybe some of the things you learned about safety and the kind of unique challenges with the return to flight?
Yeah. So after the Columbia accident in 2003 is when I moved over to work for NASA full time as a NASA badged employee, and it was my job to fix the debris problems that caused the accident. So we did a comprehensive review of not just the foam debris, but every possible debris source that could potentially cause catastrophic damage to the shuttle. And what we found is we identified over 500 different debris sources, number one, and we took a look at each of those debris sources and determined what the failure mechanism was, when the debris was most likely to liberate. If it did liberate, how is it going to fly as we go uphill during launch? And where's it going to hit, most importantly? Is it going to hit the vehicle? And if it does, is it going to hit in a place where it could cause catastrophic damage? And depending on when it was released, what's the damage impact associated with it? And what's the likelihood that you're going to have a catastrophic event take place? And we'd summarize those 500 sources and come up with the probability or risk number associated with them. Some of them were 1 in a million, and others were like 1 in 200. And so we prioritized those highest risk areas, and then we put in mitigation controls and redesigns on those top risk, which were the real drivers to boil the risk down. So that was my experience. Interestingly enough, the very first flight, 114, which we flew about 2.5 years after the Columbia accident, we had another big piece of foam debris come off. Fortunately, it didn't hit us, but we did the reconstructions, and the risk associated with that piece of debris is about 1 in 4. So we got lucky that day. Of course, we stood down again and resolved that debris issue, and then we flew out the remaining 22 missions without any incident. And probably just to wrap it up, the last mission we flew is probably the safest shuttle flight ever.
Wow.
Unfortunately, it got canceled.
As you were talking about this, I was thinking about something that's crossed my mind a lot when I think about space, the vastness of space flight. It is not only debris that can come from your own vehicle, but debris that's in space. So is there a risk to, hey, I'm launching like Artemis, and on my way out of the Earth's orbit into space, debris could accidentally hit my ship, or that I could crash into a Starlink satellite. So this is all possible, or is there mathematics to kind of prevent that from happening? Okay.
Yeah, it's unlikely just because of the short exposure time. So in low Earth orbit, there's this big debris cloud around Earth because we've been not just the U.S., but other countries have been launching satellites forever. And some of them collided and produced this big debris cloud, not just man-made, but also micrometeoroid debris cloud. And so the space station is at a constant threat, but you can minimize that risk because we have micrometeoroid debris protection, and we can also maneuver the space station to get out of the way of a possible collision. So when you fly up through on Artemis, you fly through that debris cloud or ring, if you will, and you don't spend much time there. So if you minimize the time or exposure, if you will, that minimizes your risk. The other thing that we do is we monitor all these different pieces of debris down to the size of about a golf ball. And so we know where the debris is, so we're not going to launch into a debris field that we know exists. We'll delay the launch or scrub the launch if we have any possibility of collision. So when we see a clear area, we'll go for launch.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that, because I've always wondered that, and I assumed the answer is always science, math, tracking, but I figured Yeah, but there's always some risk. One more question for you, and then we'll pop over to Dr. Liu. But you also worked as a commercial crew program risk manager, and you provided mission support for SpaceX crew missions. How was that partnership with SpaceX, and how would you say that it really differed from what you did with NASA?
Yeah, so there was a lot of change within the NASA culture to get used to these commercial partners developing their launch vehicle and spacecraft. NASA has very rigorous processes, procedures, lessons learned. They have decades, 60 years of doing business. And now we got to deal with these commercial companies like SpaceX. They have different ways and ideas on how to do things. Not that it's worse, it's just different. So a lot of times it takes SpaceX convincing NASA that their processes and procedures are going to be safe. One of the really key things, with these commercial companies and changing the NASA culture, so to speak, is the fact that this is the first space program where NASA levied loss of crew and loss of mission requirements on the partners. It's the first time ever. Now, we calculated those numbers before for shuttle and space station, but it wasn't a requirement, a design requirement. So that drove a lot of design changes because we could identify the highest areas of risk on the vehicles, and then based on the designs and the mitigations and controls that we put in place, we could control those risks to make sure that it met the requirements. But that's the first time that we've done we call it loss of crew and LOM requirement. But yeah, things worked out pretty well. Clearly, you see the success of SpaceX going up to the space station, and they do a really good job. We had some issues with the Boeing spacecraft. Those are being corrected, but nevertheless, most likely we'll fly some more Boeing flights up to the space station as well.
A quick question for me about this, and then I know I said that was the last one, but now I'm curious about this. So, but the commercial companies helping NASA with space flight in Apollo era and even in the space shuttle era, were commercial companies not involved in it, or not to the same extent? Like how is it different what SpaceX and Boeing are doing today than what happened previously?
Yeah, previously NASA was paying those companies to build the spacecraft for NASA.
Okay.
This day and age, the SpaceX had some skin in the game because they're taking some of their own resources, investments, if you will, and putting it into the company for success because they've flown commercial missions as well. They have other customers besides NASA. So that's the commercial part of it. So before, NASA had complete control over all the requirements, all the design trades, all the design decisions and so forth were all made by NASA. In this case here, that a lot of that responsibility got transferred over to SpaceX.
Thank you for clarifying that.
NASA would provide the insight and the oversight, but it wasn't to the extent that it was before, where NASA had complete control over the design, the testing, and operations of the vehicle. So it's really more shared responsibility than it is just SpaceX having the full responsibility. So if you think of that in effect, and NASA really, it's kind of like a taxi, if you will, where NASA pays for the seats, but SpaceX owns and operates the assets.
That's a really good analogy. Thank you.
Pay as you go.
All right, Dr. Liu, you supported astronaut EVA training as a spacesuit engineer and provided SR-71 and U-2 physiology support. And I wanted to just spend a little moment on that. Like, what was that experience like? What were the things that maybe stood out to you in terms of that experience and the impact that you were able to have in that work?
Let me just say this to you. With Artemis, what is old is new. The suit they're flying on Artemis is the suit that we used on the SR-71 and U-2. It's just updated. So I could take apart the Artemis suit today and rebuild it like I did in the 1980s.
Wow.
So let me just take you back. When you're doing missions for the military, right? They're top secret missions. You have top secret on your badges. It's really a lot of responsibility. And you're doing stuff around the world, and all you can say to your family is, I'm fine. I can't tell you how the weather is or where I'm at. You get on airplanes, you fly somewhere, and you land when you get there. And then you're putting the airplanes in the air for 14 hours at a time. And sometimes you're not wearing military uniforms. They're going out to do their missions. And when they come back home, you go meet them. Back in those days, we had pagers. There was no phones. They would page you. It would come back, and they would hand you an envelope that said top secret. You go to this special place to slide it under a glass. It looks like when you go to the racetrack, when you slide stuff through the thing to pay. Same type of scenario, but it's not a racetrack, believe me. You slide it, it goes right to the Pentagon, it goes right to the White House, what the planes were collecting from a reconnaissance position. So if we thought there was something happening around the world, you would send either the U-2 or the SR to verify. So whether it's troop buildups, aircraft, or something we have to do strategically, they would send the airplanes to go take pictures. What's funny about that, when I left and then went to NASA, train astronauts, two things that stuck out. One, it felt like the military again, which I enjoyed. But unfortunately, everybody there was not military people. So they don't always listen like military individuals. So you actually have to negotiate with individuals who never served, if this makes sense. So when you're serving with military individuals, you got a common goal, common mission. Here's what we need to do. Let's do it. When you serve with people who never serve, sometimes they want to question. And so you have to kind of get them to think, this is why we're doing this. You have to work with us. The two things that stuck out for me was one of the suit engineers that I worked with, there was only 3 of us in the whole world at the time because we didn't have a lot of EVAs. Until 1998, when we started building the space station, there was only 3 of us in the whole world. This guy, Don, said to me, why are you not intimidated by the astronauts? Why aren't you afraid of them? And I said, number one, I'm a pilot. I understand what they go through. But number two, I was trained in the military with people that flew airplanes that were like astronauts. So to me, I already knew what they were like. I knew the personalities. And so if you look at a U-2 pilot, they're very to themselves. They're very solo. They don't like being around crowds because that's what it's like in that airplane. SR-71 pilots and backseaters, they like partying, they like hanging with people. So it's 2 different type of class of individuals. A lot of astronauts are like that too. So you understand where they're coming from. Everything that we're doing is dangerous. So I learned that from my experience from the military going to NASA. And I apply what I learned to how to treat crew members. When crew members would tell me, like, don't worry about my gear or my underwear, and I say, no, I do worry about it because I'm responsible for you. Because if you don't get what you need, and then you're on orbit and you forget where we show you where it's at, you're going to call down to the ground and say, it's not packed. And so now I have to explain, yes, it is, and here's where it's at. That makes sense?
Yeah, makes sense as well. So with these spacesuits, you're trying to create a suit that will help protect humans in the most extreme environments. One curiosity I had when preparing for this interview is, how do you simulate these? How do you simulate these environments so that you can have a lot of confidence that when they're actually in that environment, the suits will work?
So there's several different ways to do it. Let me take you through the process. You are a new astronaut. I just get you. You come into the program. Now they're going to decide, and I don't decide this, the crew office decides if you're going to be an EVA crew member or we're going to test you out to determine if you can do it. Because it's a whole different set of skills besides flying a shuttle or flying a capsule than doing an EVA. Right? So the crew member we like to see who does EVAs is typically a tall person with long arm reach and upper body strength, right? The suit doesn't care who you are, what you look like, but you got to be able to operate the suit because when you're in it, it's difficult to maneuver when it's under pressure. So when you get assigned to me, you come over, we do what's called a suit fit check. We do a glove fit first. We put you in 3 or 4 different sets of gloves. It takes about 2 hours per set of gloves to get a size glove that fits. So what you want to have is nominal contact between the tips of your fingers and the crotches of your fingers. And they do it with sizing cord in 1/8-inch increments until we get them to fit you in a reverse vacuum in a chamber. So you're doing this with the gloves. We give you stuff to play with in the chamber. And once you say, I got a nominal fit with the gloves, then we move on to the suit. The suit takes about another hour. The suit is a modular fit. We have a predictive program that we take 144 measurements of your body, 22 on each hand, the rest of your body. We plug it into a system on the computer. It'll spit out close enough what you need to do to assemble a suit. It's like a Lego set. Once we put it together with sizing rings, and the suit is the helmet, the hard upper torso, the waist, the brief, the legs, and the boots, and the gloves. It'll pick it out. Then we'll put it out. We'll put you in it. We'll make adjustments to where you have what we call a nominal fit. So when we have the gloves fitting you from the crotches to the tips, you're doing this. No pressure points, very important, because you can lose fingernails in the gloves. All right? That's not good. Then once we have the fit in the gloves, then we make sure the arms fit you. So what you want is to have a nominal fit in this envelope in front of you right here. So you'll be able to hit all the switches and knobs on the suit. If you can't hit the switches and knobs, you can't do an EVA because you got to be able to control the suit, right? So once we have that, then we have to make sure you have a fit from your shoulders to your heels and from your shoulders to the crotch of the suit. Make sure you're comfortable in there. You with me so far?
Yeah. So you said shoulders to heel.
Shoulder to heel, shoulder to
Okay,
crotch.
and shoulder to crotch. Okay, got it.
Now,
Yeah.
not everybody fits in the suit if you got a smaller person. Sometimes we put what's called MoSite, like a rubber pad in the suit to take up space in the suit.
The suit have to fit like a glove? You
Not
can't
like
have
a glove. It's got to fit close. Because if you're too small in the suit, the hut is made out of fiberglass. You'll roll around like a ping pong ball. You'll just go back and forth. If you are not front in the suit, can't get control. And then if you fall back, your hands come out of the gloves. It's hard to work. So I want you to think about it this way. You're on a mission. We spent all this money to put you in space, only for you to fail while you're trying to do a spacewalk. Guess who they're coming after? Me.
Yeah, right.
You sized them, right? So every time they fly, I have a book on all their sizing. And I get calls from on orbit saying, this isn't working out right. Can you give me the size, right? We haven't lost anybody on orbit to date, and everybody was able to do their mission.
Yeah, this is
pretty critical.
It's more extreme than I expected, because there's an element of like, okay, the suit just works, right? It prevents you from suffering damage in these types of extremes, like heat, cold, pressure. But then there's also an element of, can you operate while you're in it? Right? Can you do dials and knobs? Can you climb? Right? Can you do that and not break your suit? Yeah. Anyway, it's pretty complex.
Here's the thing I'm going to tell you: when you're fighting a war, who's your enemy? Right? It's the enemy you're fighting.
Yep.
In space, your enemy is the environment.
Yep.
It wants to kill you. You're 5 inches from death.
I needed that sobering and fear to think about always being 5 inches away from death. So one mistake and that's it usually.
It would take more than one mistake. It's a big orchestrated play, a big Broadway play. Everything has to work, right? Yep. If you go out to do a spacewalk and you can't finish your spacewalk, what you were intended to do, you got a failure. You got a big deal and a failure on a mission. You're training for 2 years to go do this. So when it's game day and it's time to go, it's time to go. Everything that we have done, me and Jim and everybody else on these missions, it's game time. So when people say to us, oh, I want to work at NASA, that would be fun. I always say, you really don't know what you're asking for. It's not like all butterflies and sunshine, fantastic. Because when stuff goes wrong, you're accountable. Everybody will hold you to account. And you're not going to say, I messed up, I'm sorry. You're going to come up with the data to what happened. And what we do on any accident investigations or any incidents, we don't blame people. We look at processes first. Now, if the process is not working correctly, we fix it. But then if it's a training issue, we retrain. And then we look at the person. That answer that?
That does answer that. The next question I had for you is about your experience supervising engineering for the Gateway program. Mm-hmm. And also you're a NASA Silver Snoopy recipient. Is that correct?
Yeah, and Dr. Jim is as well.
Is it the same Snoopy right here that I've got, or is it a different Snoopy?
Okay,
It's for the gold, the silver.
Okay, cool. I just happened to be wearing this, and I was like, wait a second, like it's the same Snoopy. I happen to be a big fan of Peanuts. You know, I watch all of it all the time. What is the Silver Snoopy recipient for? What is it acknowledging? Yep.
Silver Snoopy is really made out of pewter, and it's flown either on shuttle or in station. They bring it back and they present it to individuals who do outstanding job on a mission or contribute to the safety of a mission. And it's presented by astronauts. You cannot lobby for it. You cannot say, hey, pick me. They decide. And if they think you did a good job, they give you the Silver Snoopy. This is when you know you do a good job, when you don't know why you got it. And you sit there confused when they say, I'll give you the funny story. My boss, Willard Jones, awesome man. And this was for STS-112. This was when we went up there to do some assemblies on station. And I was in the office, and Willard called me into his office and said, hey, I want to talk to you. I said, okay, what do you want? And some of us could be a little arrogant every once in a while, but I mean, look at what we do for a living, right? He said, some of the astronauts have a problem with you. I said, a problem with what? They don't like how you put their suit together. I'm like, I don't think you're telling me the truth. I don't believe it. And the only reason why I said that, if that really was true, I would have heard it a long time ago. I wouldn't hear it like all of a sudden. And then what they were doing was holding me in the office while they were getting everybody in the conference room to give me the Silver Snoopy. They were trying to trick me. But I know I am such a stickler to try to do a good job. I knew I didn't do anything wrong because I know if I mess up, I own it. because we don't fail at our missions. When I did one of the Hubble Space Telescope missions, there's a guy named Joe Tanner. He's going into this astronaut Hall of Fame. And when I did his mission, we had what's called a flight readiness review for the crew stuff. We call it the socks, the jocks, the underwear, everything they wear in a spacesuit, all their crew wear. And we have it laid out on tables. And the crew comes over to go table by table to tell them what drawer it's going to be in on the shuttle, where to find it. So they have it all written down. We do this so when they get on orbit, they don't get confused and say, where's my stuff? Where's my socks? And so what Joe said to me when I'm walking him through, he goes, you need to calm down and don't worry about it. I said, Joe, I do worry about it, because when you're up on orbit, I don't want to hear you calling down saying, where's my socks? Because I said, when you do that, you're going to set a bunch of alarms off down here and they're going to call me. I said, let's do this right. And so that's how it works. And when they come back from a mission, they have what's called a debrief. There's Building 1 at the Johnson Space Center. When you go to this debrief, it's all top level brass of NASA sits around this massive table, and they'll go through every piece of the mission. And when they get to the how was your suits, how was the EVAs, everybody stops and they all listen to what the astronauts say. Either you're going to be a hero or a zero if they didn't like something. I got smart about it. I would get the crew when they come back to Ellington Field and have a conversation with them. How was it? I didn't want to go hang with them. I want to know, do I need to put together a PowerPoint presentation so I know if something was wrong, right? One of the astronauts said to me, I didn't like my suit glove fit check. My fingers were peeling in the gloves, but he said, you know what? It's between us. Don't worry about it. That's not because he liked me, because I was attentive to his needs and did the best I can do. Because if I had a lackadaisical approach, he would have said to everybody in front of me, I didn't like the suit, I didn't like the gloves. That's how it works. You become friends and you have this professional relationship. They want to know you care because, and Jim will attest to this also, when you fly airplanes, you're counting on the maintenance guy. You got to be able to trust the guy who's doing maintenance on that airplane. If I can't trust you, do I want to fly this?
No, I wouldn't.
So that's the way it works.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that. That's quite the honor, especially when, there's no lobbying. It's really an acknowledgement of what is just excellent work. So congratulations on being a recipient of that. I wanted to move into questions that I have for both of you. You both talk about humans and our ability to make judgments and judgments under uncertainty as well, and that we're maybe not always the best at making calls on that, how risky something is, overestimating our confidence, overestimating how rare things are. Especially in something like space flight. What are the things that you've learned about this? As a undergrad, I studied a class that was like behavioral economics, and we talked a little bit about this and some of the biases that we have in our ability to judge risk. And I wonder, in working with space flight and working in the aerospace industry, where these kind of lack of judgment comes up the most and how you combat it.
Well, I'll take the first swing at it, but yeah, there is some bias associated with perceived risk. And I'll give you a couple examples. If there's a major plane accident or a shark attack, or someone gets killed by a shark attack, for instance, that gets sensationalized on the news. So people see that and they think, wow, it must be risky to fly, or it must be risky to fly or swim in the ocean. But in reality, getting in your car and driving to the grocery store is a higher risk level, statistically speaking. But from an emotional standpoint, because you see this, and it looks really, really bad on TV, you have a perception that flying in the airplane or going to swim in the ocean has this perceived higher risk, when in fact that it's not. So NASA relies heavily on analytical models. They call it probabilistic risk assessment models, or PRA models. We can analytically model just about anything, and we let the machines, the computers, calculate the risk. And along with that risk calculation, they'll also give it some uncertainty bands, because the results are only as good as the inputs and assumptions that go into the models. And so there's uncertainty bands associated with it. What that does for us is it takes the emotion out of it. But clearly, after the Columbia accident, which was caused by a debris issue, there was a lot of emotion attached to that, because people knew that debris caused catastrophic damage to the shuttle, and we lost 7 crew members as a result. So getting back in the saddle again, the convince the crew office and NASA as a whole that we were safe to fly, we relied heavily on those analytical models to get over that emotional bias associated with what the perceived risk was from foam debris on the shuttle program. So that's how hopefully those examples kind of illustrate how you could have this perceived bias, even though statistically it may not be in fact as big a risk as you think. And then number two, we combat that at NASA, primarily relying heavily on these PRA models to analytically not only give us what the risk number is, but also what the uncertainty bands are around it. And that gives them a better understanding what the actual risk might be instead of the perceived risk.
I guess as a follow-up to that, is that successful? So the whole overarching theme is that there's a perception that something is riskier than it is probabilistically because it just happened, right? We just watched this shuttle blow up on TV, right? And this must be a more pertinent risk than we're told. But then you can look at these PRAs and say, oh, well, this is like a 6% chance of this happening, pretty unusual. And here are all the factors that need to be in place for this to happen. But it's not common. So just believe us and like, we'll fly again. But how do you overcome that emotional aspect of like, no, there's no such thing as 0% chance that this won't happen, right? But we're doing all the things we can to reduce it. And like, if we want 0% chance, we shouldn't fly at all because there's risk.
Exactly right.
How do you adjust to this mindset, right? Because there's just risk every day. I mean, regardless of if we're flying to the moon or we're flying to the space station or we're, like you said, getting in your car. But how is that perception changed? Like, how do I feel more safe about hopping on my bicycle, biking up, 20 miles than I do swimming in the ocean, like you said, and I'm afraid of getting stung by jellyfish or a shark? Right. How do you combat this and like, even as an individual so that you can act rationally?
Yeah, well, the first thing I would say is actually know what the statistical risk numbers are. So you have some factual basis to support your decision making. But as far as NASA is concerned, there's nothing safe, quote unquote, about flying in a launch vehicle or a spacecraft.
Nope.
There's inherent risk, historically speaking, about 1 in 100. So every time you fly on the shuttle, SpaceX launch vehicle, historically it's been 1 in 100. So for every 100 missions, you're going to have a catastrophic event on one of them. So how we get around that, number one, we recognize what those risks are. It's not safe. And so what we're trying to do is mitigate the risk as much as possible through our design, through our operations procedures, through our training, through all of these different design enhancements and mitigations and controls that we put in place to make the next generation vehicles like SpaceX, for example, safer than what we flew on shuttle. So we actually at NASA take it serious when we say, hey, what are some of the lessons learned in terms of risk and safety on the shuttle and apply those to the new designs. So we incorporate fault tolerance, 2 fault tolerance, for example, requirements, which means that you have to be able to survive 2 failures in order to continue operations. But in some cases, like the heat shield, it's 0 fault tolerant. If the heat shield's compromised when the astronauts came back on Artemis, could end up to be a bad day. So what do? On those type of systems, they do extensive design work, extensive testing, extensive review, and extensive measures to protect that heat shield throughout all phases of flight. So those are the things that are done. We're trying to make the next generation vehicles safer than the ones before, and those are ways we do that. Our PRA models help us identify what the top risks are, so we can attack those top risks, get our overall risk down, and effectively make it a safer vehicle. But it's inherently unsafe. Like you said, if you don't want to come face to face with a 1 in 100 risk, don't fly. The astronauts are well informed of what these risks are, as well as the rest of the space community at NASA. So that's how we get over it. And if you're worried about swimming or riding your bike, I would get the actual risk results, and then you can do what's called risk-informed decision making. So if it's a 1 in 10 that you ride this bike 20 miles or swim in this ocean where it has known sharks and there's been attacks, that should tell you that's probably not safe to go in there and swim.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, get the facts so you can make risk-informed decisions.
Perfect. Dr. Liu, you have anything to add on this topic?
Yeah, you may not like it, but I'll tell you the truth. I always do. Here's the thing. If you take a center line, on the left you have logic, on the right you have emotion. You're married, right?
I am.
So from your perspective, your wife has 5 awesome pair of shoes. She wants to buy 2 more pair. A little of emotional buy. She likes them. You're using your logical side. Do you really need them? Right. But if you want to have a happy marriage, you let her buy them.
Typically, yes.
That's an emotional purchase that you really didn't need, but to save peace, it's okay. So logically, you just mute your logic side. So in safety, where a lot of accidents happen, when people apply emotions to a situation instead of logic. So
Right.
the thing about swimming with sharks, you know they're out there. You know jellyfish are out there. You're going to say, okay, emotionally, I want to swim with the jellyfish. Me logically saying, they're still out there. So do I really want to step in there?
Right.
And also, you start mitigating the risk when I fly on an airplane. So I don't want to fly out an airplane, say out of a third world country where I don't know the maintenance records on the airplane. I don't know how they do it. Or am I flying United Airlines or Delta, where I know they're U.S. carriers? I know their record. I think I have a safer bet on those carriers that I'm going to make it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes perfect sense.
But it doesn't guarantee it.
No,
But I
there's no
feel a little more
guarantees.
comfortable.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Everything we do has some risk. And every time I get on a flight to go to Vegas, which is just an hour flight from here, yeah, there's a risk that something may go wrong. But I consider it a minuscule risk from
Right.
my point of view, and a risk that's worth taking to save myself the 6 hour drive. And the drive is actually more dangerous in my mind.
It is more dangerous.
Here's the main problem you have. And do you know a lot of people that are nervous flyers or get very upset because they lack the control of the environment that they're in? They don't know who's flying the airplane. They don't fly the airplane. They have to sit there and they're not aware how an airplane flies. So they get nervous. Somebody like Jim or myself can sit there, listen to sounds, and know exactly what's going on with that airplane. When we hear stuff that makes us nervous, you need to be nervous because we understand what's going on. Give you an example. If you're sitting in an airplane and you're landing, say, in Vegas, and all of a sudden the airplane doesn't land, it does what's called a missed approach. Do you think that's a big deal?
Yes, it seems like it.
Well, why is it a big deal?
It's a very deviant thing, right? Like I've flown 1,000 times. How many of them have done that?
But-
It's like maybe once, or it seems like, oh, this is really strange.
But
Yeah.
why is it a big deal? See, now what me and Jim know is something you don't know about it because you wouldn't know. But
Yep.
here's why it's a big deal. They have a certain amount of fuel in that airplane. To get there, plus 30 minutes or plus 45 minutes, depending, right? That's one thing. Two, it could be the weather. Could be socked in. Three, they could have mechanical problems with the airplane where the gear doesn't come down. So this all goes through our heads now, like, why are we not landing? Where you're just thinking, okay, we're not landing, but maybe we will. But we're looking at other problems in our head, and now we're logically, good or bad, we're living with it because we understand.
That's well said. It gave me a lot to think about, actually, because there was a time I went to visit my mom, and she lives on the East Coast, and we were flying from here in Salt Lake City to JFK. And on the way there was some weather, and they diverted us, and we landed in Atlantic City. And then we were on the tarmac in Atlantic City for like 3 hours. And I had my 4-year-old and my 1-year-old with me, and
That's
my wife.
harsh.
And then we just kept asking questions about it because I had flown in rainy weather many times and I've never been in this situation before. And so I was wondering, is there really something wrong with the plane? Are we out of fuel? Like, what's going on? And yeah, there wasn't a lot of transparency about what was happening. But it was just, hey, once the weather cleared up, we went back in the air, we landed, we were supposed to land initially at 7 p.m. We ended up landing at 1 a.m. And yeah, it was made for a rough day. Yeah, but those situations, when I don't have the experience or the knowledge like you have about air flight, then yeah, I just had a bunch of questions running through my head. And some people were panicking. They were trying to get off, and they were like, hey, can let me out of the gate, and I want to go find a rental car because this seems dangerous. And to me, it just seemed like I needed to stay. I know we're running up on time, so I wanted to talk about Artemis a little bit. Artemis, this program is in full swing again. There's a lot of investment, there's a lot of effort to make it and return to the moon. I am a big Apollo era junkie. You can't see it behind me, but I've got Apollo memorabilia. This is my thing. I love it. And this was 1969, right? Like we were able to go land several missions, do this. And so what's the big deal? Like, why can't we do this again easily?
You want to take that, Jim?
Yeah, I'll take it.
Yeah,
I mean,
okay.
It's been over 50 years since we've gone back to the moon. So number one, you have physics, orbital mechanics, and so forth. So it's very expensive to get a pound of weight up out of the Earth atmosphere and into orbit, number one, and then also journey to the moon and back safely. So you still have the physics problem to overcome, and then it's very expensive to build rockets to do that. Those have really been the drivers in my mind. Now with the advent of the Space Launch System system that Artemis utilizes. SpaceX is building Starship, which is a heavy lift vehicle, and Blue Origin as well, their New Glenn, which is supposed to be tested sometime this week. You have a lot of launch vehicle lift options available to you. And you have a lot of history behind these companies with successful spaceflight behind them. So the more they test and the more they fly, the more confident NASA becomes that it's quote unquote a safe launch vehicle. Take all those things into effect and you take a look at kind of the program history. I'm in my early 60s now and I was hoping we'd be on Mars by now, but you still have physics to overcome and it's very expensive. Spaceflight is not cheap. The other thing with SpaceX and Blue Origin is that they've reduced the launch cost substantially. So it makes it more affordable to get mass into space. They've reduced it by a factor of almost 20 in the case of SpaceX on Starship. So that's substantial. Now you went from $20,000 a kilogram down to about $1,000 a kilogram. And based on where Elon wants to go in the future, he wants to get down to about $100 a kilogram launch cost. So those are the advent of technologies over the years have helped get those launch costs down without sacrificing reliability and safety of the vehicles. You combine the expense, physics, the advances in new technology that we have nowadays, and multiple options available to us for launching missions like this into space. The time is right, so we'll see that. And so maybe we'll see a manned mission to Mars at some point in the future. That's what really governs it, is the physics. And there really has to be some business reason or some other reason to go back to the moon. So there's a lot of different options that they're looking at, such as helium-3 for fusion reactors and power generation. They also have good evidence that there's water on the poles, so they have the ability to make rocket fuel from splitting the water atoms into hydrogen and oxygen. So they'll learn a lot on the lunar base that they want to establish and may use that as a stepping stone to go to Mars. That's the plan.
Okay, zooming in on that a little bit. So there's physics, there's cost, and then there's some intrinsic motivation. So I suppose in the Apollo era, it was just beating the Russians there, right? We need to make sure that so we don't have those same factors anymore. So now we have commercial factors, and maybe we want to.
Hold on. Yes, you do.
Okay. Are you saying China?
You're forgetting politics. There's a military strategy to all this as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
To protect the U.S. This is how the moon started, because protecting us from the Russians, right?
Yeah.
When you had President Kennedy put the initiative out to go, then Nixon picked it up to continue on, right? You got the Apollo program. Then suddenly the Apollo program moved over to the shuttle. They canceled the last flight of Apollo. That became a rocket that's stationary at the Johnson Space Center. They built the shuttle program because they thought that was going to be up and down like every month. Didn't go like that. So when we had the two accidents, the second accident, Bush had to be convinced to keep going, and he was. He did. But then when he was out of office, Obama came in. We had Constellation. We were getting ready to go to the moon.
Right.
But Obama said, been there, done the moon stuff. There's no reason to do it. He shut it down. It wasn't until Trump came in who decided, let's go to the moon, and he developed with the Artemis. Now, when he goes out in 3 years, that next person could decide, I don't want to go back to the moon. I want to do green energy. I want to do, windmills. And that's the reality of it, though.
Yeah, that's a good point. Politically, with the change of administration, doing these missions is a long-term endeavor.
It seems
changing
like it.
political priorities, that's been a big factor in the space program. But I think with the next administration, at least I hope this is the case, that we have enough momentum behind going back to the moon that it continues on no matter who the next president is. But the good news is that we've had bipartisan support typically within Congress and the people who approve our NASA budget. So generally speaking, it's a bipartisan endeavor. It's just a matter of national priorities, and that's usually driven by whoever the president is at the time. So Lou brings up a really good point. So all those things combined.
And the criticality of this mission being successful. If this mission was not successful, we would be in a world of hurt.
Yeah. And the other thing is that we've got a new competitor. We got China wants to go back to the moon too. So it's not just the Russians anymore. We took care of them a long time ago, but now it's China wants to go there. And you take a look at the advances in new technology, such as fusion power. Helium-3 is abundance up there on the moon. So that would be an ideal fuel for fusion reactors. So there's a little bit more purpose behind going back than there was 20 years ago. We didn't have these advances in technology.
So we spent the last hour talking about risks of aerospace, and then we just started talking about Artemis and going to the moon. Do you think that the commercial, the military, the political outcomes that could come from this are worth all of the risks, or is that still to be determined?
No, it's worth the risk. We just have to make sure you got the right leadership in place to pull it off.
Because I've heard things like we were going to put data centers in space. We're going to interplanetary species. Do you think all of this is possible, or is it still kind of sci-fi?
Well, the interplanetary transportation, that's going to take a while. So we'll need a Star Trek type engine.
Right.
It'll be nuclear driven. So the good news is that there's a lot of emphasis on it right now for nuclear, for space applications, for two reasons. Number one, as a means of power generation as well as propulsion. So you have to advance those technologies in order to make something interplanetary exploration feasible. Can we go to the Mars on it? Yes, there's no doubt we can. Our chemical rockets will get us there, but that nuclear propulsion engine would get us there a lot quicker, and by reducing the total mission time actually improves the safety and more likelihood that it'll be successful.
Okay. And I know Dr. Liu, I mean, you worked on spacesuits, and can we make a spacesuit where we could live on Mars? Is that a possibility, or is it even?
Not know.
Okay.
I do not know. There's too many unknowns to say yes.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It seems very hard. Yeah.
Can I say this to you?
Of course, yeah.
Story. So I belong to a group on Facebook called Space Hipsters, right? They're nice people. A lot of them don't know about what's it like to work in the space program. And they were talking today about who's going to be the next people to go on Artemis 3. And they're guessing. And I had to bring them down to reality. I said, look, this is not like the show Love Island, where you just pick these people. There's a lot that goes into this process. It's no magic to it. You got to figure out there's politics to it. There's who's ready to go, who's physically fit, who could do the job. And then they decide prime crew and backup crew. And I'll give you a really good example that really threw me for a loop. On the return to flight STS-114, I trained Steve Robinson and Soichi Noguchi to do spacewalks. These guys had never done a spacewalk before that mission. I've never seen that before, but they made them the spacewalkers for that mission. But guess what? I said, okay, I'll train them. They did fantastic work, but that's what the astronaut office wanted. I complied, but I didn't know why they picked them, but they picked them. So I said, fine, I'll train them, and they did a great job. And so that's the reality of it. So, and the biggest problem NASA has is how to toot their own horn sometimes, to show the great things they do. And me and Jim go through this all the time. There's a lot of great people like us, but they don't know how to get the word out to explain it to the masses.
Yeah, and I think part of my goal is to help facilitate some of that, because I think that this hour plus that we've been discussing this has been one of the most enlightening I've had, and I think it will be the same for our audience and anyone else who runs into it, because this work is so multidisciplinary. It takes so many people that are excellent across so many fields to put humans into orbit, into space, orbiting the moon. Like this is not simple work. This is very, very complicated, and not only from just like the physics aspect of it or the rocket propulsion aspect of it, but it's just even the human interconnected, like the risk management. What does this mean politically? Like it's a very complicated world, and it's just not covered in the depth that it should be. It's been interesting, Artemis, the last couple of weeks, because everyone I know is excited about it and watched it on TV. But which I think is awesome. I think it's great, but I think the implications of it aren't that clear, right? It was just kind of like, hey, we're going to go do this. Here's how long it's going to take, but like what it means from here forward, I think wasn't clear. Like I was asking people, what do you think this means? And they didn't know. But I think I'm very excited about this, and even talking about the idea of like a nuclear reactor on a spaceship, like helping with the energy and the propulsion. Like, whoa, like, is this possible? Like, I had a guest on earlier talking about some nuclear disasters, Chernobyl and whatnot, and to go from that to, hey, we're on a spaceship that is using nuclear. It's like it seems sci-fi, but it sounds like we're not that far from these things.
No, we're not. The Russians have used nuclear propulsion and power generation for last 50 years. We just don't know about it.
Before the Artemis came back to Earth, I did an article on skipping off the atmosphere to slow down. I did an article maybe 5 days ago. I got 49,000 impressions on that article just
Wow.
because, and it was a simplistic article. People don't understand it,
Yep.
but it's getting crazy traction because
Yeah.
we're explaining stuff to the common man of what it's like. And I think if you keep doing this, you'll get more traction. You get people like us on, we'd be happy to help you.
Well, I'm definitely going to have you on again. And to kind of wrap this episode up, I'd love to do a quick fire round. So it's just
Sure.
going to be some true false type questions, one word answer.
Gotcha.
So the first one is true false. The biggest risk in a complex mission is usually technology failure and not human error.
False. It's usually
False.
human error.
False. All right. One word answer. What is the most important trait for a safety leader during a mission critical crisis?
Logic.
Honesty.
Honesty. Okay. Military versus NASA. Which environment has stricter approach to routine safety audits?
Military.
That's a tough one. I would say the nuclear power industry and the military probably. I'll go with NASA. It's been my.
But Jim, can I give a caveat to that?
Yeah.
When we're in the military, they put you in jail really easy.
That's true. That's true. They do have that ability. So, all right, Doc. This was for Dr. Liu. Which is a harder environment to engineer for, an SR-71 cockpit or an extra vehicular spacewalk?
What way do you mean? Like doing the job?
Yeah. So, like, did you find personally more taxing, either intellectually, physically, harder to work on?
Okay. So putting someone into an SR-71 is harder because they got a pit pin. You have to contort your hands below the seat to hook up the oxygen full. So if they have to eject, it activates the oxygen. If you don't get it on, they don't have oxygen flow. You kill them. That's the worst part of that job.
Yep.
They
That
actually had
sounds...
to prove it out with Ichiban 974 out of Okinawa in 1988. When they had to punch out from an unstart, everything worked as advertised, and the crew was picked up by Filipino fishermen, taken back to the island, and they were recovered. Yeah.
Oh man, that the idea of just landing out in the ocean somewhere and then getting picked up by fishermen, it's like something out of television, but it's like real things that happen. I guess a follow-up one for you, or what's a more nerve-wracking audience for you? Astronauts in EVA training or university students?
Neither. I love them
Okay.
both.
Okay.
I can handle both.
This one's for Dr. Jim. True or false? More safety procedures always equal a safer operating environment.
I would say false, just because
False,
you
okay.
say always. Generally,
sometimes.
we do. Yeah.
Okay.
Hold on, Jim. Remember what they used to say? When
Never
the
say
paperwork
never.
weighs as much as the rocket, you're ready to launch.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point.
That's a good phrase. I'm going to steal that one. Okay. The last two. So this one's for both of you. True or false? Zero incidents is a realistic goal in a high consequence environment.
I would say false. It's always going to be your goal, but realistically, there's always some danger associated with it and risk associated with it. It's your goal. We want to keep the crew safe, but
I concur.
realistically, it's false.
All right. Last one is one word. Describe the future of commercial space flight safety.
Cautiously optimistic. Sorry.
2 words. Okay. That's all right, though. Cautiously optimistic.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. Cautiously optimistic. It's rigorous.
Perfect. Well, this has been just the delight of my week, and thank you for coming on the podcast. We would definitely will have you back on again, and there's like 80 topics that we could just dive down into. So I'm going to do that if you will come back again. And thank you so much for your time today, and we'll be in touch.
Great
Roger
time.
that. Take
All right.
care.
That was a great conversation. Thanks to you both, Dr. Louis and Dr. Jim, for bringing your mission critical expertise to our listeners today. For the listeners, if you want to learn more about their work, either with the Space Leadership Institute or the Space Guys, we have some notes in the show notes and some links in the show notes that will help you get to that information. Thank you for listening to Industrial Risk Beyond the Blueprint. Please subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode. Until next time, stay safe.